In 2011, one of the most widely used desktop environments deleted the taskbar, removed desktop icons, and told users the new workflow was better. A French developer looked at what had been done to the desktop his distribution depended on and decided he would rather build his own. He forked the code, added the taskbar back, kept the system tray, restored desktop icons, and released a desktop that looked like what millions of people were already used to. 14 years later, it ships on one of the most recommended distributions in the ecosystem and is routinely dismissed as outdated by people whose own desktops break every time they update. In 2016, the project's website was hacked and users downloaded images containing a backdoor. In 2020, the team blocked the parent distribution's packaging format and has refused to unblock it since. The desktop is a fork of the environment it was built to escape. The window manager is a fork of the original's compositor. The file manager is a fork of the original's file browser. The screensaver is a fork too. Every core component takes the Upstream technology, strips out the design decisions the team disagrees with, and adds back the interface conventions the Upstream project removed. This dependency means that when the Upstream makes breaking changes to its underlying libraries, the team has to adapt with a fraction of the resources. The result is a traditional layout with a panel at the bottom, a menu in the corner, a system tray, and a window list that has not fundamentally changed since the first version shipped. Idle memory usage sits in the range of 500 to 700 megabytes, lighter than the environment it forked from and comparable to the customizable competitor that outweighs it in settings but not in stability. Customization runs deeper than the Upstream provides without extensions but stops well short of the 500 options the other major competitor exposes. That middle ground is deliberate. The settings application offers enough control to adjust the experience without overwhelming someone who switched from a proprietary operating system last week. The distribution that carries it as the flagship desktop includes a backup tool that creates system snapshots before every update, a driver manager that installs proprietary graphics and wireless drivers through a graphical interface, an update manager that categorizes packages by risk level from safe to potentially dangerous, and multimedia codecs that the Upstream distribution does not include by default for licensing reasons. A user who installed it on a parent's computer 3 years ago described them as never having had a single problem and not knowing the machine is running anything different from what they had before. The project depends on the Upstream distribution's infrastructure for its package repositories, its kernel, its driver stack, and its base system. The Upstream is controlled by a company that has pushed its own packaging format into the default installation process, replacing the standard package manager's output with its own format without telling users. The team behind this desktop responded by blocking that format entirely and recommending the competing open standard instead. The dispute has continued for 6 years. The tension is structural. The project criticizes the Upstream publicly, while depending on the Upstream's infrastructure to exist. A separate edition, based on a fully independent distribution, exists as a contingency plan in case the relationship becomes untenable, but rebasing the entire project would be a massive undertaking for a team funded entirely by donations and small sponsorships with no corporate backing, no formal governance structure, and no foundation. The founder still leads the project 20 years after creating the distribution it ships on. He still codes. He created the desktop because the Upstream environment his users depended on made itself unusable for the audience he was building for. A separate desktop emerged from the same crisis as a direct continuation of the previous environment, and both have shipped as editions of the same distribution ever since. The distribution's reputation as the default recommendation for anyone new to the ecosystem is both an asset and a stigma. Users who have run it for years describe being dismissed as beginners for choosing stability over complexity. The team acknowledged maintainer stress in early 2026 and announced plans for fewer releases to reduce pressure. The workload of supporting millions of users on a volunteer budget has reached the point where the project's own leadership described the pace as unsustainable without changes. The succession plan, if the founder steps back, is not publicly documented. The 2016 security breach remains the most serious incident in the project's history. The website was compromised, and the installation images available for download were replaced with versions containing a backdoor that gave attackers remote access. Users who downloaded during the window of compromise installed what they believed was a secure operating system and received one that was not. The project acknowledged the breach publicly, rebuilt its infrastructure, and improved its security practices. No comparable incident has occurred since, but the episode is still cited by critics a decade later. The display server situation mirrors the approach the project takes to everything. The modern system is supported experimentally. The legacy system remains the default. The team will not ship the transition until it works for the users who depend on the desktop for daily work. The competing environment that this project forked from has removed the legacy system entirely. The other major competitor made the modern system default but kept the legacy available. This project has done neither, sitting on the legacy system as the default with no announced timeline for changing that position. On older hardware, that approach is a strength because the legacy system works without the driver complications the modern one introduces. On the long-term timeline, it is the same existential risk every desktop still running the legacy system faces. A desktop update in early 2025 broke compatibility with a recent graphics card from the largest proprietary vendor, causing freezes and crashes that required a manual command to recover from. The team cannot control the vendor's driver quality, but the user experience is that the desktop failed after an update. Updates between major versions often fail. The team recommends a fresh installation rather than an upgrade, which means users who have spent years configuring their system face the choice between a potentially broken upgrade or hours of reconfiguration on a clean install. The backup tool mitigates this by preserving system state, but the expectation that a major version change requires starting over is a friction point that the competing environments do not impose to the same degree. Cinnamon for anyone who wants a traditional desktop that prioritizes not breaking over, not innovating, where the layout is immediately familiar to anyone migrating from the dominant proprietary operating system, where the backup tool, driver manager, and update categorization make maintenance accessible without terminal commands, where the distribution it ships on includes multimedia support and proprietary drivers by default, and where 14 years of conservative development have produced a desktop that generates almost no horror stories because almost nothing changes unexpectedly. Accepting that the project depends on an Upstream whose strategic direction it actively opposes, that the team is funded entirely by donations with no formal governance or succession plan, that the founder has acknowledged unsustainable workload, that major version upgrades often require a fresh installation, that the display server transition has not begun in earnest, that the 2016 breach is a documented precedent for infrastructure vulnerability, and that the desktop's greatest quality is also the criticism most frequently leveled against it: stable, familiar, and unapologetically boring. The desktop for people who have work to do and no interest in their operating system, making that work harder. Every choice is a trade-off. At least now you know what you're trading.